How does an entire prehistoric food chain end up swallowed whole and turned to stone? A 7 August 2026 essay in Defector pauses on a recent paleontological discovery in Australia to ask a surprisingly practical question about ancient food chains. Humans treat stuffing one animal inside another as a bizarre culinary stunt, but in the Cretaceous ocean, it was simply a way of life. A fossil containing 3 nested levels of predator and prey becomes the starting point to reconstruct a single chaotic afternoon where everyone was eating someone else. It is a funny, slightly gross reminder of how quickly an apex predator could become lunch. Written by Sabrina Imbler in Defector, narrated for Arva.
Various journalists have tried and failed to investigate the origins of Turducken, that matryoshka-inspired dish of a chicken nested inside a duck nested inside a turkey. One chef in Louisiana claims to have invented the dish, but refused to tell the New York Times when or where he created it, or even his age. But turducken is best understood as a modern combination in an ancient lineage of engastration, a cooking technique in which one animal is stuffed inside another. Other famous entrants in the genre include haggis, a potpourri of sheep organs stuffed inside its stomach, and kiviak, a wintertime Inuit dish made of little auks that ferment inside sealskin. The most ostentatious engastration may well be Alexandre Balthazar Laurent Grimaud de la Reynier's roti sans parelle, or roast without equal, which called for a bustard stuffed with a turkey, a goose, a pheasant, a chicken, a duck, a guinea fowl, a teal, a woodcock, a partridge, a plover, a lapwing, a quail, a thrush, a lark, an ortolan bunting, and a garden warbler. In nature, however, engastration is simply a way of life. To swallow someone whole often also involves swallowing whoever they recently swallowed. Scientists recently discovered an exemplar of this all-natural turducken from around 100 million years ago in the Cretaceous. The recipe is as follows. Stuff some early cephalopods inside a flying reptile called a pterosaur, then stuff that pterosaur inside a marine reptile called an ichthyosaur. As a garnish, feed part of the ichthyosaur to an even larger marine reptile called a pliosaur. The fossil was found in Queensland, in what was once the shallow Eromanga Sea, and described in the journal Gondwana Research.
The fossil was first spotted in the wild by 2 couples, Mike and Kathy Freeman and Gary and Barb Flowelling, according to a press release. Mike and Kathy and Gary and Barb had come to find fossils at a public site in the outback. The fossil was collected, but was not immediately identifiable, and as such was nicknamed Bob, which stood for Bag of Bones. 3 years later, a curator from the Kronosaurus Corner Museum in Richmond, Queensland, returned to the site to discover most of an enormous ichthyosaur. When researchers scanned some rock nodules found near the ichthyosaur's skull, they found the remains of a pterosaur's jaw and its last meal. To understand how this fossil came to be, imagine, if you will, the waves of the Eromanga sparkling under the sun. A pterosaur skims the surface of the sea like a storm petrel, scooping up unsuspecting prey of fish or squid-like cephalopods called belemnites. Then, the pterosaur's beautiful day is rudely interrupted by the gnashing jaws of an ichthyosaur, which lunges out of the water like a dolphin to gobble down the pterosaur. Karma then comes for the ichthyosaur, which does not have enough time to digest its meal before sinking to the seafloor head first, shattering its jaw upon impact. What exactly happened to the ichthyosaur is unclear, but it appears to have involved a giant plesiosaur, such as Kronosaurus, which could reach lengths of 43 feet. The ichthyosaur's bones were crushed and split, in patterns suggesting it was eaten in chunks by the plesiosaur, which might have attacked the ichthyosaur in the water column or scavenged its carcass on the seafloor. In this light, the pliosaur is the phantom fourth, even bigger bird of the turducken, whose bones were not literally present in the found fossil, but almost certainly swallowed parts of the ichthyosaur that had swallowed the pterosaur that had swallowed the fish and belemnites. We cannot consider the various critters said fish and belemnites might have consumed, which would multiply the levels of the turducken quite impressively, but also threaten the analogy in this infinite scope, meaning the various worms and shellfish and algal mats that would be so implicated in the food chain. But the fossil does represent a rare piece of evidence of a 3-level predator interaction from the Cretaceous, as well as the first evidence of an ichthyosaur eating a pterosaur. In the shallow seas of the Eromanga, even enormous predators themselves became prey. All of this brings me back to my question. Would you eat this Cretaceous turducken? The challenge of turducken, and any encastration, is its preparation. A blog from ThermoWorks, a manufacturer of precision thermometers, dubs the turducken a thermo-logistical nightmare. A turducken is essentially an enormous orb of meat whose very center must reach food-safe temperatures, which seems a recipe for dry meat. There is a hard and bitter truth embedded in this. Any enjoyment people get from most turducken is false joy driven by novelty and gravy, per the blog. Fortunately, this modern turducken problem would not have been a problem for the pliosaur, which would have enjoyed its ichthyosaur meal raw, given the impossibility of making fire in the ocean and the fact that non-human animals, both modern and extinct, do not cook.
One can only imagine the real joy this plesiosaur had upon crunching through the meaty flesh of the ichthyosaur to discover, perhaps, the subtle tasting notes of a pterosaur and the small and crunchy skeleton of its fishy breakfast. Bon appetit!